105.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. My name is Deborah. I'm the Assistant Director of Edison Public Library. It's great to see you on a Wednesday night for this timely and very special panel discussion on censorship and underrepresented voices. Tonight is a culmination of many months of hard work by one of our supervising librarians, John. John will be moderating tonight's discussion, so let you go.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And thank you for the people online on YouTube joining us virtually. Welcome to Freedom to Read, a panel discussion on representation and censorship. This is part of our events for Banned Books Week. Banned Books Week goes from October 5th to the 11th. We have a number of events happening across our Edison Public Libraries. We have flyers in the front of the room. Please grab some on your way out. You'll see our kids, teens, adult events that are happening all week long in part of Banned Books Week. Banned Books Week highlights the importance of safeguarding intellectual freedom and access to diverse literature. This event tonight invites us to unite in support of these fundamental rights. It's an opportunity to recognize the profound contributions of groups like AAPI NJ, Guardian State Equality, and New Jersey State Library, whose efforts continue to positively impact our communities. Some of you may have seen recently in the news that PEN America released a report titled The Normalization of Book Banning. It came out October 1st, so just a couple of days ago. In it, it states that between July 1st of 2021 and June 30th of this year, PEN America indexed school book bans counting 22,180 bans across 45 states and 451 public school districts. But there's a lot of things promising happening. States are passing Freedom to Read Acts, such as Delaware, Massachusetts, Oregon, Rhode Island, and here in New Jersey, which we're going to learn more about tonight from Jennifer, the State Library. The Freedom to Read Act in New Jersey was signed into law in December of 2024, and we're going to learn more about that tonight. And prior to that, here at Edison Public Library, we drafted a resolution that got passed in July of 2024 to be a book sanctuary. And that was a movement amongst a number of libraries trying to band together and support intellectual freedom. Within that resolution states, whereas the freedom to read is a human right, whereas books do not require readers to agree with topics or themes, but instead allow readers to explore, engage with different perspectives to form and inform their own views. So with that, that's the things we want to support and highlight and celebrate tonight in this panel discussion. We want to make it an informal, interactive presentation. If you all have questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hands. People joining us via YouTube, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and be spoken out loud. And we'll have a Q&A at the end as well. But if you have questions along the way, let's make this fun, make it informal, make it interactive. So feel free to raise your hand if you want to join in the conversation, or wait until the end for a Q&A. And with that, I am going to turn things over to our esteemed panelist. Esteemed panelist, please tell us a bit about yourselves and the work that you do for your organizations. And we'll start on my left, and then work our way across the team.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dekashna Lang. I'm an 8th grade English teacher and have been for 22 years now. And I'm here tonight representing AAPI New Jersey, which is an organization that formally formed after the AAPI mandate was passed here in New Jersey, which mandates that Asian American and Pacific Islander stories are taught in our public schools. However, the problem was that there wasn't really any formal way for teachers to be educated on how to deliver that instruction to their students. So community organizations like AAPI New Jersey rose up to provide the resources and instruction for teachers. And that's some of the work that they do. I became involved because they decided to run a program called Teach Asian American Stories. And the very first cohort of that, I was one of the fellows chosen, and they provided training for us so that we could then turnkey training for other teachers throughout the state. And that training involved training in history, but then also, I provide opportunities for teachers to be trained in the types of literature that they could use in their classrooms that represent valid, true, meaningful stories from different perspectives, representing the varied Asian American perspectives, because one very important thing is that it's not a monolith community, right? There's so many different communities in that umbrella. So that's one of the major things that AAPI New Jersey does, and the education impact is so important to us there. They send out boxes of books, but providing that instruction on how to use the books and get the books into the hands of kids is the most important thing. So that's why I'm here tonight.
So my name is Aaron Patanza. I'm here representing Garden State Equality. Garden State Equality is a statewide LGBTQ plus advocacy and education organization. So my role there, I actually worked for Garden State Equality from 2015 to 2019 as policy director. And in that role did a lot of work with the legislature, with state agencies, with the transgender task force, doing kind of the stuff we saw in the Freedom to Read Act, right? Like passing that, working to pass that sort of legislation. And then on the back end, and I'll use as an example, the mandate that we have LGBTQ inclusive curriculum in middle and high school in New Jersey. So that was during the period when I was at GSE full time. I now work there. I do consulting work, and they're one of my clients. But that mandate, similar to the AAPI mandate, basically we had to fight for legislation to pass it, and then when it was passed, we found that educators, many of them wanted to teach this material but weren't sure where to start. The mandate did not include education for teachers or training for teachers on how to work in these subject areas with their students. So Garden State Equality kind of stepped in there and started doing trainings for educators, but also put together with a cohort of other organizations that do education work on sort of some workshops where we can build curriculum out. And so that's sort of the work relevant to this. And then right now at Garden State Equality, I mostly do work on transgender rights, especially with young people. So working on, stuff that's coming out of the federal government and how that's affecting New Jersey, working with parents and others in the community, and then kind of like bringing them and their stories to places like the Attorney General's office or just the hospital systems.
Thank you. So my name is Brielle Winzell-Widget. I'm the Deputy Director at Garden State Equality. My pronouns are she, her. I never know how to answer the question, what do I do at my organization? Because I kind of do all the things. But one of the things that I have the pleasure of doing, and I have two of my employees in the room, is to help work with their programs. And one of the biggest things that we've done in the past couple of years since Aaron worked for Garden State Equality was really to do more direct service work with youth, and also making sure that we do trainings in schools to help teachers implement inclusive curriculum in their schools. A lot of times you'll hear from teachers like, I don't want to do another lesson plan. I don't want to do anything more than what I'm already doing. And one of the ways that we work is we have a whole website called teach.lgbt where we worked with Make It Better for Youth to actually put together inclusive curriculum plans, where if you are an educator in this room, you can type that in, and let's say you teach 8th grade English, there will be a lesson plan for 8th grade English that utilizes some of that inclusive curriculum in that space. One of the things that we have done is, Justine, who actually is our Director of Youth Education, Youth Development Education, they actually do a camp, but they did a traveling book library for Pride Month. And at every Pride we went to, students had access to banned books that were for free, that they could come and take home with them, so that they weren't having to pay for them or having to go travel far to get it, but to see themselves in books that are in spaces. So right now, we've really been trying to make sure that our programs are accessible, that we're everywhere across the state, and that there are no barriers to being able to see yourself in curriculum.
Good work. My name is Jen Nelson. I have the privilege of serving as the New Jersey State Librarian, which basically means I'm a bureaucrat. Aaron and Brielle do a lot of work in policy development. My role is really around policy implementation. So how do we make, once the law is passed, how do we make it effective? How do we make sure it works? How do we make sure people pay attention to it and that kind of thing? My organization, I have about 80 staff members that I oversee. And one of the things we do is provide, try and provide innovative services and I'll use the word inspiration cautiously to other libraries in the state in terms of what's possible to do in a library and for library patrons and for the people who use us. So yeah, I'll be the bureaucratic type here. You must.
Thank you so much. So I have a question to pose to you all that has a couple different parts to it. So as I was saying before in that recent Panamera report, it was going over just how many book bans there have been across the country from 2021 to 2025 in this 4-year period. So why do you all think there has been that rise in book bans and challenges over these 4 years? Why is it that stories that feature racially diverse or queer identities face disappropriate censorship? And how does race, gender, sexuality, and religion intersect in these conversations around representation in literature? And don't let me distract you if I'm taking photos in the back of the room.
I can get the ball rolling. And that there are a lot of things happening in that question. But I think maybe the first thing to address is why has there been a rise in book bans? And I think there are a few things going on there. First of all, I think there's been a rise in the formalization of groups joining together to politicize book bans. Previously there were parents here and there or people here and there who would target a book, but now all of a sudden, there are formal organizations that pop up in a school district or a board meeting that oppose a book that they have never read or in a school district where they don't live because it's become a political moment, right? And because they're aligned with a political viewpoint that they feel would be opposed to those voices being heard. So I think that's part of it, and why generally formerly oppressed voices that need to speak up for themselves have become the target is because they don't want those voices to be heard, right? And those stories have long been untold, and because now they are being told, because they're acting for themselves, because they are speaking up and representing themselves, because they're getting published, because they're getting out there, then there is a subsequent opposite action, right? They need to be then tried to be repressed. And I think that that's what's happening, and obviously I can't speak for everyone, but historically the Asian American community has faced an issue of invisibility and erasure, and that has been their story, trying to be wiped out, trying to be told that they weren't here. People never hear about the Asian American community until the transcontinental railroad. Nobody knows that the first Asian Americans to arrive here were in the 1500s. Filipino sailors and slaves on ships that arrived here with the Spanish conquistadors. Those stories weren't told, right? And now they don't necessarily want them to be told now because it changes the narrative.
I agree with everything you said and the way you laid it out. I think we have had a moment of increased visibility for a while now, particularly in my world, right, of queer people and voices, but also certainly of folks in other marginalized communities that we've had more visibility, and with that has come a really powerful backlash at this point, because there are people who, you know, sort of set up those groups that you're talking about happening on the ground, sort of, that don't want these stories told, because it does disrupt the narrative about America that they want to put forth, that they want to believe that this is all just like a rosy picture. And I think with queer identities as well, it's also about erasure, that queer people have those stories have long been repressed. People have long been pushed into the closet. When we think about queer history, a lot of people don't see that as anything before the 20th century, don't really understand what a long history we have in this country. And then, especially with the increasing sort of visibility of trans people and trans youth, there's a lot of backlash there, because there's a desire on the part of some parents, right, to sort of not let that be said or heard, because the belief is, well, if my kid doesn't read about it, hear about it, see it, then they're not going to recognize themselves and or identify as it. So I think that's a piece of it for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a little more of a more radical approach to the answer to the question. That's just my personality anyway, but I want to say that, like, you know, basically we want to control the narrative. Like, for most people, as a Black queer woman, I didn't learn about my history. And I think when most people think about going to school, the first thing is, when you talk about slavery, everybody says slavery is Black history. That's an issue. Slavery is also white history. It's also Latinx history. It's also indigenous people's history. So when you're thinking about just that in itself, the way that you package what you are learned or what you're told, that changes the narrative. So we control, or the government wants to control the narrative. Most of the things that we've learned have been whitewashed, and we have this crazy thought that, like, social contagiousness, which I think is what you were trying to say, is that if my student reads a book about a gay guy, they're going to be a gay guy. Well, the comparison is that I grew up watching Disney, and every single movie had a man who kissed a woman. I had no interest in kissing a man. So, like, if there's a social contagiousness, why doesn't it work the other way? I think the biggest thing is that education is power. So you have to look at the timeline. It's cyclical. Like, in the 1960s, when we started to, you know, integrate schools and started to let people have knowledge as power, it became movements and people fighting for rights. Now, if you suppress that, you don't have individuals who are still fighting for rights, who have the education to know that what they were told was not actually true, or the ability to paint people's family members or ancestors in a light that they did not want you to see. So I think it's all about, number one, control. If you ban voices, you don't allow for people to become doctors or lawyers. If you don't see a Black doctor, you're normally taught that maybe Black people can't be doctors, maybe Black people can't be lawyers. So I say that, and then also, to answer the second question, one, you have to realize that there's a very small percentage of people who want these books banned. Like, although you see it in all spaces, you're like, oh, there's so many places. It normally starts with maybe 2 families. And they bring it to the attention to the school board, and now it's become a bigger deal than what people think it is. It's not a whole school. It's not all 300 parents. But also, I think when you talked about religion is like a tool that's being used to suppress the voices of these books. So to say Harry Potter, which was a book that I read when I was growing up, and it was banned because of witchcraft and wizardry, a lot of it was that it went against my religion. You can't read it. But there weren't really any things that were implicit that people felt some kind of way about. So I think when you want to control the narrative, you have to control access to the things that people have. And if you control access, then you don't have the power through education. So my biggest part is that ban books is like the one of the keys to white supremacy in my eyes. And I think that as long as we continue to ban books, we'll continue to maintain a level of power.
Well, you know, this current time reminds me of 2 things. One of the books, while back I read, I don't even remember the author's name, the day they came to arrest the book.
Oh yes, I read that in school,
Okay.
actually.
And then the other poem is that this they spoke ill of this person and I didn't speak up.
Yeah.
And then when they came to speak up about me, nobody spoke up
Spoke up,
because
because
I
they-
never spoke up.
Yeah, and I love that because one of the biggest things that people don't realize is that during Nazi Germany time, they burned books. That was one of the first things that they did, so that people can't remember where they came from. They say, oh, like trans people didn't exist, but trans people existed during Nazi Germany time and even before that. But if you burn books, you burn science, you burn things that have proof,
Burn the
then how
history.
can you prove it? You know what I mean? You burn history, so how can you prove it? So absolutely.
But the interesting thing about that poem too is that it's not symbolic, it's literal.
Yes.
The pastor, Reverend, who wrote it, didn't speak up. He was a Nazi sympathizer, and he allowed it to happen. Right? He allowed the books to get burned. He allowed his neighbors to be taken away. And a lot of people read it as a symbolic reading, but it wasn't a symbolic reading. He did allow it all to happen. When I actually do that with that poem with my students, they think that it's a symbolic reading, that it's meant to teach them a lesson, but it's not. It was a literal telling of his experience of what he allowed to happen. And they that blows them away because he's reflecting on his own experience.
And currently the Supreme Court is going to decide about the ban on the conversion therapy. So, it's like times have changed so quickly. It's scary.
Very scary.
Not a lot I can say. I think I take a more, maybe philosophical perspective, but I think people feel entitled. There's this culture of entitlement that we have in our country, and particularly in the United States, and people feel entitled to say what they want and, not just think what they want and do what they want, but to impose, to tell you what I think about you or what I think about anything. So I think it's a combination of that sense of entitlement as well as, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but increased visibility. So the more books that have been published, the more visible, I have a son who uses a wheelchair, the more visible kids in wheelchairs are, the more people are noticing him and, kind of coming at him or saying things to him. So I think there's something in there about the increase in visibility and the sense of entitlement leads to a situation where people, are noticing more. They're getting uncomfortable. They're not feeling comfortable in their own skin, so they take it out on everybody else.
But also, what happened is that the Palestinian and the things that Columbia University and all that. And I'm thinking that, hey, if you love your country so much, why did you come here? This diversity also got out of hand. That people forgot that you're first American, you have those values, and if you wanted to just do your country stuff here, the country you left, for whatever reason. So who's speaking up for America, the USA? I noticed that when it's 4th of July, everybody is going shopping. But there is a Pakistan Day and there is the Indian Day parade and, Columbus Day, everything, so it's like, who's for America? Who's for USA? Who's holding the values, true values?
I think we have the opportunity to, particularly through books and literature, to shape our values, to shape what our beliefs are, and
Yeah,
increase
understood.
and
But I'm on Medicare, right? I get a Medicare statement. It's in like 30 languages.
Yeah.
And my mind, whoever is eligible for Medicare has to be here 10 years and have a work history 10 years. So if they didn't speak English, how did they get by? So what is the need for these 30 language translations?
Yeah, I see that as a sign of
That,
respect.
I can understand that you provide that, okay, there is a translation if you don't understand, call this number, which everybody can read.
Yeah.
And I
But,
really,
it's getting to a
honestly, I
point.
really appreciate your comments. I've seen a number of other audience members also have questions too, so I kind of want to get around to different people as well. Yeah, I really appreciate that though, for sure.
But I mean, who
yeah.
are we here?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. Hopefully we can explore that a little bit. I see some hands raised over here. Did you want to jump in?
Oh,
as
I was
well?
just gonna
Yeah,
give some
please do.
context in terms of Medicare. So hi everyone, I'm a nurse. So I've been in contact with a lot of healthcare systems and things like that. You brought up a really good example in terms of things being offered in multiple languages and just in the state of New Jersey, and something that I really am grateful about the state of New Jersey is how diverse we are and how we cater to all people of all backgrounds. And hospital systems have a legal obligation to provide care for people in our state, regardless of where they come from. So it's more so just ensuring that people, no matter where they're from, have access to services. Folks who are undocumented do not have access to Medicare the way that people think, and I think that's part of the reason that we're here for a panel. A lot of times there's a lot of misinformation just even with banned books, and I think that us having really important conversations about these things could just help disseminate some of that misinformation. So for Medicare, for example, illegal undocumented people don't get access to any of those services. I think it's 0.04%, if I'm not mistaken, the actual amount of people who actually receive those services. But it's a lot of misinformation because everybody's oh my God, they're the illegal aliens are taking all of our healthcare, and it's they're allocated 0.04% of all of those services. And again, it's more so legally you can't turn anybody away if they're in an emergency room,
You're right.
But I'm really grateful for having these conversations.
Yeah, and it's great that we live in such a
Misinformation.
yeah, we live in such a diverse state, and we have great organizations working with our diverse populations. I want to pass it on to Deborah as well.
I was just thinking, because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about the digital age, and it really is kind of a lot of little parts of what you're saying has just exploded because of that. You're saying that there are fewer people that are actually wanting to censor books, but we see it much like with TV because it's all over the internet. And same, it also allows people to combine together to organize. It affords that, but at the same time it gives the ability to have representation too. So it's such a pro and con situation. I have no answer, obviously. I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. But like you said, does offer the pros as well, because I have a friend who's a media specialist, and she was talking about how she has a network of friends who travel around to different districts where there are challenges to support the media specialist in that district, and they do it all online to show solidarity, so it definitely has its pros as well. But yeah, I don't know, there was no answer to that one.
Now, this time I wanted to ask a question to each organization. So for you, Dr. Lang, you mentioned the Teach Asian American Stories initiative a bit earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I believe it started with a mandate, and then you guys kind of developed a curriculum around it. And how has it, the impact it's had on students and teachers in New Jersey so far in your work doing it?
Well, I grew up in New Jersey. I moved here when I was almost 2. And in my entire education here, I never once read a book where the characters looked like me. And I'm sure you guys might have had similar experiences, never reading about your own experience. The closest I came was reading Paul Auster, and he described Jersey City, where I grew up, as a city on the wrong side of the river, and that was nothing about race or anything. And that was the closest experience I had. So that it resonated with me when we started doing the work that Teach Asian American Stories does, and our cohort, the first cohort, was just a few of us teachers learning more about making sure that we knew the correct history, because as an English teacher I wanted to be sure that I had the history correct, and then going out and turnkeying that to other teachers from K through 12 to make sure that they were prepared to find ways to integrate into the classroom those histories and those stories. And then once we started to do that, we began to branch out a little bit, because my expertise and my doctoral work is in literature. So then I started to pull books that I had experience with in elementary school and middle school and high school that speak to different experiences, and showing teachers how they can work with the standards that you're supposed to be teaching. This is not something extra that you need to be doing. This is something that works right with what you're doing all the time. You can be teaching vocabulary and comprehension skills and all the things that you're doing, or you can do it with this story, or you can do it with this story. And a lot of times elementary school teachers, their social studies standards don't really have anything to do with teaching history, as it were. So they'll say like, I can't teach Asian American history right now. That's not part of what I need to be doing. But their standards do deal with teaching community, and it deals with teaching movement and immigration, or knowing yourself, knowing your family, and picture books are a wonderful way to do that. So the Teach Asian American Stories initiative has had a massive impact. We do webinars, we do in-person trainings, we do curriculum workshops in the summer. So just each time we have one of those, the teachers then go back to their schools, they spread the word. They also send out free boxes of resources to educators, so they have those to work with. It's just been a ripple effect, and it's been wonderful to see. And I've had students come up to me and say, with sort of glossy eyes, like, I've never before read a book about myself. And I myself have had the experience as a teacher. I started teaching Samira Ahmed's book, Love, Hate, and Other Filters with my students. And, in the book, she makes casual reference to a wedding that she goes to with her family, and the Bollywood movie that she's watching. It's just tiny little things, and then larger experiences as well. But reading that in print and seeing my experience validated and having my students discuss that in class and feel validated and feel seen, like, that's the larger impact, really. It's not really about teaching the history, although of course that's important, but having them feel seen and validated in the classroom in ways that they have not done ever before, that's a massive impact. And that's really what AAPI New Jersey is trying to do and trying to achieve. Just to link back to the previous question, I don't know if we ever did, was like about the intersection of all of these groups, about race, religion, sexuality, and gender. I think there's such a massive intersection because nobody is one thing, right? Nobody is just their race. These kids out there, they have religion, they have gender, they have sexuality, they're all of these things. So the more books we can get that represent all of these voices, or multiple voices, right? Like George Take is the speaker for the Banned Books Representative, right? And he talks about his book being banned, which we actually do read. They call us enemy in my class, and it's just like he's such a fabulous speaker because you look at him and you're like, I don't understand how anybody could ban his book. But he's a perfect example of the intersection of so many things, and the honest story that's just needs to be told. But yeah, and that's what we're trying to do.
And this is if I remember right, it's the third year of fellowship? Fellow
yes, they are in their third cohort of fellows right now. And then the previous fellows are now ambassadors. So we do other things, and we still teach workshops and
you speak on panels, like yourself.
Yeah, so for example, Roslyn, who's one of the directors, and we are working on an awesome project with the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center where we're working on a resource for educators, and when it's done, we get to bring it back to New Jersey and spread it around. So
that's exciting.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. And for guaranteed equality, we got Brielle and Aaron. I ask you, how does LGBTQ representation in books affect young people's sense of identity and belonging? I know we hit on some of these topics already.
I can take it, sure. So I feel like someone said, I think you said that like you grew up not seeing yourself in books or not seeing yourself in anything. Like I didn't see, and I identify as a lesbian, I didn't see anybody who was in a book that identified like me, or even TV. So for Garden State Equality, a couple things that we've done. One thing I brought is a coloring book that we created, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, young people shouldn't learn about things, but like simple ways to put it, like this is what families look like. And it doesn't say anything more than identify what your family looks like. No language that you would think is any kind of social contagiousness. But then what we did was we added people from across New Jersey, and then also people that you might have heard of, like Bayard Reston, who's in here, that they're coloring and just necessarily learning about what they've done. But being able to see representation in queer people in a space through a coloring book is just a really simple way for them to kind of learn about, who they are. Another thing that we did was, and I didn't mention earlier, I always forget to say that I'm also a teacher. Well, I'm a professor. I teach at Rutgers, New Brunswick. I teach LGBTQI policy to undergrad and grad. And one of the assignments that my students do is they learn how to prepare a 2-minute testimony at a board meeting about books. And they pick a banned book or a book that they think could be banned, something that's close to them, and they talk about how if that book was banned or if it wasn't, how that could have helped them as an individual. But 2 more things. One, we have George Johnson's book, and George Johnson is actually from New Jersey. He is the #1 banned author in the country. And we just recently had an LGBTQ youth conference where George Johnson was our keynote speaker. And if you could see the youth's face as he spoke, and they saw a gay Black man who talked about how his book is just about his life. And just about his experiences and how many people relate to who he is as an individual. But I wanted to end with, we get the opportunity to meet some really cool young people. And when I prepare for things, I always ask them about it, because who am I as an adult to tell the youth how they feel? So I wanted to read, one of our students said, I would not have the confidence to speak out on LGBTQ+ and other social issues without books that affirmed my queer identity. I was, and still sort of am, a very shy and reclusive child, which meant books were my world. The first queer character I came across was in my favorite series, Percy Jackson. And if you know, Percy Jackson is not a queer book. It's a book with maybe a queer character, and the Olympians. I had loved these books for years already. And when I finally got to the House of Hades, and it was revealed that one of my favorite characters, Nico D'Angelo, is gay, I felt for the first time I could be a hero. We hold fictional characters on a pedestal. They teach us right from wrong, and they show us what it means to be human, vulnerable, brave, emotional, and resilient. All of that means teaching us to respect ourselves and each other for who we are. It's as if I hadn't read The House of Hades in middle school, it would have taken a lot longer and a lot more guilt and self-hatred for me to come out and finally feel comfortable in my skin. And I think it's really important to think about what they just said. It wasn't that if I hadn't read this book, I wouldn't be gay or queer. It's that if I didn't read this book, it would have taken a longer time for me to understand who I was and the negative effects that came with that journey.
But you know what I'm seeing in the society here is that I have a friend whose son is very well accomplished and he's gay. He had a job offer in Texas and he had a job offer in Massachusetts. Do you think he went to Texas?
Of course not.
That's the reality.
Of course not, yeah.
That's interesting.
I just want to say that person is so eloquent for someone so young. I don't know how old they are, but
Yeah, so she wrote this when I did the Labyrinth book panel, but she's in college now. She's a freshman, but she wrote it while she was still in high school.
Yeah.
And it's good to know she's from a very, very conservative New Jersey county. So when you talk about books, that was the representation for them.
And for the New Jersey State Library, Jennifer, how do libraries navigate the tension between diverse collections and community pressure? And if you could tell us a little bit about some of these recent challenges that happened within New Jersey libraries.
Yeah, I think in terms of what recent challenges, it really were what prompted the Freedom to Read Act, Senator Zwicker's work. The problem has been much more in school libraries than it has been in public libraries, and I shouldn't name organizations, but there's a certain organization that's national that sends people to different states to testify at school board meetings and that kind of thing. One of the provisions of the Freedom to Read Act in New Jersey is the only person who can file a challenge to a book is a person with a vested interest who is a resident of that community. So they're kind of working to get rid of that. Those voices. I think in terms of navigating the tension, it starts with the philosophical foundations. There's this, back in 1931, there was a fellow librarians named S.R. Ranganathan. I don't know if it rings a bell, 5 Laws of Library Science. His books are for use. Every reader, his or her book.
Right, yeah, I remember that.
Every book its reader save the time of the reader, and the library is a growing organism. So, and that's sort of the foundation for what a library is and how we approach books. And I think as we keep that in mind and we know our communities and know the people we're serving and what their needs are, we talk to them, we are part of the community, it becomes easier, not easy, but I think it tempers the pressure because you're talking with your community, not at it, to it. And I think that's really important for a library to be able to do.
Absolutely. We talked a little bit about this now, what communities lose when certain books are removed from shelves. Does anybody want to speak a little bit more about that? And also share if there are any books in particular that really touched you, that shaped your thinking, or that you saw yourself in, or anything of that nature?
I can start because I
Please.
didn't speak last time. Anyone else speak, of course.
Yeah.
But I think the community itself, right? So if we're talking about queer people, then the queer community, right? That community loses maybe a sense of their own history. And as we're talking about, they lose maybe access to being able to understand themselves and their own identity earlier, right? Because they had that through books. But I think also like the broader community, right? All of us lose something through that. There have been studies done that show that people outside of these identities who are exposed to literature that gives them a window into somebody else's reality are less likely to bully, right? And so there's that piece of it. I think for me, like I grew up in New England. I grew up in a town that to this day, I believe is 96% white. I went to a high school. There were 2 students in my graduating class, 2 girls who were Asian American. That's it. Everybody else was white. And my entire understanding of other people's experience and diversity came from books, right? Because that's all that was around me, right? So if I hadn't had access to that, I think I would have turned out to be a very different person in terms of empathy, right? Or understanding someone else's story. So I think that is something we often look at, like what is the community itself lose, but also thinking about like as a nation, as a society, what do people who may not have that marginalized identity lose? And then I guess in terms of a book, so this is interesting just because I'm kind of a snob, and so typically it's like, oh, this was like Obama's book list, or this won the Pulitzer, and that's what I read.
I just want to chime in really quick and let people know that Erin's like library is like color coded and like it is bi-color. It's beautiful. Beautiful.
So this book that I'm going to speak to is not that, right? It's a memoir, and it wasn't like, it's not, a profound piece of literature. But I'm a transgender man. I was assigned female at birth. I identify as male. And I was in college in the late 90s, early 2000s. I didn't know that there were trans men. Like, I had no idea this was even a reality, right? Like, I sort of knew that there were trans women, sort of, vaguely, but I didn't have anything speak to my own experience that I understood as my experience, right? It wasn't like that wasn't going to exist for me. It did. But I just had no access to any information about this. And I read, I took a gender, at that point they called them women's studies. I took a women's studies class, and one of the books we read was Leslie Feinberg's Stone Birch Blues. And in that book, they talk about, first identifying as lesbian, but then kind of their masculinity, coming to identify as male, understanding that, going through a process of transition. And this just like completely opened up my world, that this was a reality that somebody else experienced, and that allowed me to kind of look further into that and see, like a community there. So, that's kind of like, that's what books do.
Yeah,
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
I can go. So one, I was going to say what the community loses, and it's definitely access. I think a lot of people don't think about, for people who come from low economic communities, the school library is where you find your books. And I know some librarians who do an amazing job they like discreetly put certain stickers in their library so queer kids know that those books represent them and they don't have to feel like nervous that they're exploring their gender or anything about that. But I think that they lose access. If there's someone, you don't hear people saying get a library card anymore. So if you're someone who's, your family doesn't have a car, now George Johnson's book's not in the library. Your public library, where y'all have 3 because I went to the wrong one, but if you only have 1 library and it's 10 miles away, how do you get to that book?
Right.
How do you get to the access that's going to affirm you? The book that I picked, and I picked a different one because this is a book that affirmed me in my adult life, and actually someone who's sitting here got it for me, is a kid's book about body hair. And it affirmed me because I'm a woman. I was born woman. I'm all natural woman. My facial hair is natural. And in this book, it talks about how women are told that you should not have facial hair, how women should not have belly hair, how women live to different standards than men. And when I read this book, because I'd always thought about writing about something like that, if more kids read books like this, the questions are not a standard. They can be who they want to be. And so I brought this one because as an adult, you can still change your life reading a book. Yeah. And this was one of the books that really affirmed me.
That's great. And Jennifer, you touched earlier on the Freedom to Read Act. This is a monumental, very important thing here in New Jersey. Can you dive into it a little bit more? Tell us about the effort to get it passed, what it took, what exactly it means, what's the future of it, and all that fantastic news.
It took a really large coalition. It was an interesting bill because it brought together school libraries and public libraries, which is kind of unusual to put them in kind of the same place. There were a lot. One of the hearings I went to, there were probably, I think the hearing lasted for, and I'm not exaggerating, 6 hours. With people testifying, most of them in that hearing against it. The next one, most were for it. But and so there was a lot of conversation, and we saw the thing. There's a fellow who represented the World Library Organization, which and somebody's organization about libraries, who just was incensed that a library would want to provide materials that somebody could relate to. He was not an SRA guy, I guess I would say that. So with the act itself, with the terms of it, library board, and I can only really speak to the public library piece of it, I need to adopt or have policies that affirm read it. The policies they support of broad and diverse and balanced collections. They have to have a process for reviewing challenges to materials. It's surprising a lot of libraries don't. But as a policy, policy is your friend in this instance. There has to be a level of transparency. The policies and forms and whatnot need to be available on the websites. And it matters because the Act really does uphold every resident's right to read and explore ideas without censorship, and that is just so important. The book I was going to mention that made a difference for me when I was early teenagers, dating myself, called Lisa Bright and Dark. I don't know if it rings a bell with anybody, but about a young girl who was mentally ill, and that was the first time I read the experience of mental illness and was able to see myself in it, and people can be different, and that there can be something wrong that other people aren't noticing. But anyway, so it matters. Go back to it matters. Building community trust. I think that's really important to have processes that people can see and be part of. Which is part of what it calls for. Certainly supporting the equity and diversity. I think that wide range of voices and experiences is so important. They talk about, I forget what author talks about it, but books as doors and windows. And or mirrors, see yourself in it, you can see through it to somebody else. And I think that's really one of the core things with the Freedom to Read Act, is recognizing that that's what books are. And really, at its bottom line, the policies affirm the library's mission, and its place is a safe space for knowledge and inquiry. And I think people forget that when we think about books, we think about, let's sell us the ebooks, we'll go download, we'll do this, we'll do that. But it's really that knowledge and inquiry is what a library is about. Building, using information to build knowledge to change lives is, the classic. At any rate, in terms of the practical parts of it, my office will be looking for libraries to have compliant policies and doing review. We're actually starting a series of technical assistance sessions for library boards and trustees and directors to talk about the implementation of it, because it has some unusual provisions in it in terms of, for example, library board has to appoint a review committee to review challenges. It has to have a certain type of membership, and it has to meet within 30 days and make a decision, which is, I don't know if you've tried getting any better people for dinner. It just doesn't happen in 30 days these days. So anyway, so we'll try and demystify it and help people understand that by and large, my sense is that most libraries are meeting the intent of the law. So it's just a matter of making sure the language that they're putting to protect themselves is aligned with it. And I think the other unique thing about New Jersey's law that other states have since adopted is the protections for librarians. We had a couple of really significant cases in New Jersey of school librarians in particular being harassed to the nth degree. And this doesn't allow people, it protects the librarian to do the librarian's job and to make the books available and not get punished or have the opportunity to fight back, to have a legal leg to stand on to fight back, which I think is really important. One other thing I was going to say. And it affirms the right of librarians to be librarians. I had one colleague who works in universities say to me, well, guy's conservative. It's like, well, what's the library going to do, buy every book? And I said, well, no. One, there are budgets. Two, we learn about how to select materials, how to know our communities, how to do these things. So no, a library is not just going to buy every book, and it was kind of fascinating, but I think it really shows, the law shows a respect for librarians as a career, as a profession, as a ethical path toward knowledge building for our communities.
That's great. Yeah, and it was just signed by the governor in December, right, at a Princeton Public Library. Yep. And I know our politicians in Edison voted yes for it, which is fantastic. Yeah. And then it begins in 2026?
Well, again, this is weirdness about the way it's written is it's in effect as of December 5th, 2025, but my office is the one that's assuring compliance, so we're saying that we need library boards to have compliant policies by December 2026. So we know that not every board meets every month and things take time, and we want to, I believe it's really important for library boards to have the time to talk and to discuss and to really explore some of the issues, because it will be new for some people, and we know that we have some boards in the state that we're on the gamut of very conservative to very liberal, so we know there are going to be a lot of conversations out there. What else about it might you want to know?
I think you covered all the great bases. Yeah, if there's any questions about it at all, yeah.
Yeah, the only
please,
thing that I
please.
would add with school libraries is, and it goes to public librarians as well, is that the great thing about this is that you as a parent or guardian have the right to determine what your child reads, but you do not have the right to determine what everybody else reads.
Yep.
And that's a great takeaway from this Freedom to Read Act.
Yeah.
I forget which author it was that said that, was it Stephen King? I forget who it was that said that because I don't eat steak, everyone has to be a vegetarian. That is what book banning is like. I forget who it was. Somebody famous said that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that give me hope in the movement to protect intellectual freedom and inclusive representation. The people we have here tonight are doing fantastic work with that. how we touched upon this a little bit before about how can we create that dialogue with people who oppose certain books or voices rather than further dividing our communities. I know, Jennifer, I think you spoke a little bit about that, how we do that in libraries. Then we want to touch upon that a little bit about how we create that dialogue and invite that conversation.
Yeah, I think it starts with listening and being open to the conversation
Right.
and, being willing. I'm a writer too, and I do this exercise before I start writing something where I suck my ego out of my work. And I think the more we can suck our ego out of the conversation and really listen to people, we can understand them better. So for me, it's all about creating that degree of understanding and being open to knowing that I may not agree, but oh well, let's go have some coffee, share company together. So yeah, I think it's
That's good. And Sherry.
Well, toward that end, we talk a lot about safe spaces. And safe spaces used to mean, at least in the queer community, what's said in here stays in here when we couldn't be fully ourselves. What there's been a movement toward in a lot of places is a brave space. And my experience, which is the only thing I can speak from, is that there has been not even engagement, it's fighting to the death over things that really don't matter. We can embrace safe spaces, but having brave spaces where we used to be able to exchange ideas, agree to disagree on some things, realizing that we all agree on the capability, we want everyone to have access to a free and equal education, to have a roof over their head, to have and this really came home to me in COVID, where people were saying, well, so-and-so shouldn't get a COVID shot. And it's whether it's flu or COVID, it's a public health issue from my perspective. Education is a public ignorance issue, where when we speak of light and dark, and we've got Diwali coming up, which is the victory of light over darkness, embracing that idea. And would we even know what Diwali is without having books about it or having friends who speak of it and understanding more about what makes each of us interesting to other people? And checking our ego for that, going into a brave space, understanding that, okay, if I don't agree with you on something, why am I having such a reaction to that? What's in me from my programming and I'm calling it programming, from when I was a child that maybe I didn't get at home, but the world around me has changed.
Well, and it starts, I think, also with knowing yourself and being willing to know yourself, which might mean facing things that are uncomfortable or things that, you're aware don't resonate or you don't like about yourself, but being able to accept and be compassionate with oneself and the experience of being human and being part of a larger community, I think is just hugely important.
And I saw a hand raised on that side.
A quick question I was wondering is, book banning, is it like a uniquely American experience, or if we look to like Asia and Western Europe, I'm just wondering,
Historically, it has not.
Okay.
It has definitely happened in other countries
Well,
historically.
you can think back to the 30s and Nazi Germany, sure.
Yeah,
But I was wondering,
But and beyond that, absolutely. But currently, I'm not aware currently of the status. I know that there are certain countries that limit availability. I don't know if that can be considered the same. Is that considered the same thing as book banning? What they allow to be imported into the country, is that the same? I don't know.
Right.
Well, when Salman Rushdie's book was
Yeah.
Well, I remember, because I come from Ireland, in the 20s and 30s, I think, all of James Joyce's material and Edna O'Brien, nobody in Ireland could get to read them, but other places.
And you, sir, I believe you had your hand.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit. I heard, I don't know if it was like February, March, basically early in 2025, there was a phrase going around in the news called muzzle velocity. And I think I've got that right, but basically it seemed like the strategy of a certain political party was just hit them with every possible thing at all times, constantly. And so as I've started to simmer and react to that and the idea of that, on a personal note, I was able to use like AI to help out. Basically created a website, used AI, used deep research, and basically was able to connect people who've been detained by ICE, who have been dealing with getting bad attorney help, because that's a cottage industry to profit off of that situation as well. But basically used AI to figure out across the United States what are law firms that have been approved by Hispanic bar associations to do this kind of work, and then created a site out of it. And now we've gotten some silly number, like 50,000 people have visited it, et cetera. Right? I don't necessarily have like ideas like that every Tuesday. And a couple of things on that, but the first thing I'll ask is like, how are you guys dealing with the muzzle velocity of this? Like, how do you keep your energy up when one day it's book banning, the other day it's deportations, the next day it's something going on in school shootings? Like, it does feel like a constant onslaught. And I'm not like, while this was a cool story, the other things I've been doing is literally not watching the news. Turning my iPhone into just black and white instead of having colors on it, to like literally stop getting addicted to all the things that could like raise my cortisol, basically. So, yeah, I don't know if you have a specific answer. I don't even know if I asked a specific question. I would just love to know how you're dealing with it. Maybe a pep talk is what I really need.
I would say therapy. I talk about all my stuff in therapy, and you know, but I think it takes in the way that I do my work. I can only speak for me. There's an unfortunate or bittersweet desensitivity that I have to be able to do this work. I have to have less empathy or emotions for myself and more empathy for the community. I have to, and I say that because, you know, I went into work 2 weeks ago and we all saw that a black man was hung, or a black student was hung somewhere. And as a black person, I'm like, okay, like, here we go. Like, let's take a moment. Our organization in particular, we took a moment of silence just to kind of, you know, regulate and take a deep breath. But I think for me, it's more so, we've been here before. So muzzle velocity is the first time I've heard that term, but during the civil rights movement or during slave times, they did the same thing. They used every form of fear, and that is a tactic. So to create a climate of fear is a tactic so that we as people don't know how to function. And back then it was so that Black people didn't know, like, if I look someone at the wrong way, if I don't look at someone the wrong way, either way I might be in trouble. And right now, that's how it is. If I fight for book bans, or if I don't say anything, if silence is political, and if I say something, it's political. It's the same thing. So, and it's interesting you asked that, because I just went to the African American History Museum, the Smithsonian, over the weekend, and that was one of the things, climate of fear, and it's something we've seen before. So I think what pushes me is that we've been here before. We've seen multiple pandemics. We've seen multiple cyclical spaces. We've found solutions, and I believe that we're going to find a solution here too. It's the same playbook, just with different players. And I think that we have to come back to finding the unity that we need, or the ideas that you have on a random Tuesday night that allow for us to bring that together. And therapy.
I have a 2-year-old, so I've already been down the therapy.
I think it can be very overwhelming, and you know, you sit and you scroll through the news cycle and you feel like there's nothing that we can do, everything is over. But when you have a moment to recenter yourself, all you can do is what you can do in your own space, right? So if you have a space that you can take action in, and for me that's my classroom, and I feel like I can walk into my classroom every day and I can do a little something in my classroom every day, and I feel like what I do in my classroom every day has an actual impact. And if I have 182 days with them in the year, then I can have an actual impact for 182 days. And it might be a small impact, it might be an impact that we don't see the results of for 4 years, or who knows how many years it'll take. But when I remind myself of that, I feel better. When I open my phone, I feel worse. But I think for each of us, we have a sphere in which we have some impact. So if we try to have impact in that area, then I think that's all we can do.
Yeah, and what makes me really helpful is things like the passing of the Freedom to Read Act, the passing of the initiative to teach Asian American stories in schools, and what Aaron and Brielle, what you were telling me about in our conversation.
I was gonna
about
say.
Yeah.
One thing I was also gonna say is that like part of you said muzzle velocity is the fact that
I hate that I'm popularizing the word.
Yeah, I just want to educate myself. But another tactic is that for people who don't know much about policy, a lot of times what you're learning about federally is just to do that. It is really important to learn about local policy, to go to your local Board of Education meeting, to go to those spaces, because those are the places that really impact us. And not to say we do sit in a space of privilege in New Jersey. Like there are some really crazy things going on in Texas. However, sometimes you have to sit in that and say, I'm so grateful for Governor Murphy, who, and this is what Don was just talking about, a couple of weeks, 2 weeks ago, just signed an executive order, which is to allow for learning standards for the Latinx community in schools. So, when you think about hope, you're having these individuals, these elected officials that we're putting in these spaces who are saying, hey, there is no mandate that says that schools have to teach Latinx history. But now we do have one here in the state of New Jersey. So some of those things also are a way to give you hope.
Yeah, I sincerely thank our panelists and all the hard work you all do. Is there any other final thoughts and questions? Anything in the chat, Kevin? No? Does anybody else have any kind of final thoughts and questions? We got a hand over here.
I looked up muzzle velocity.
Yeah, so did I.
It's apparently related to handguns or guns, which makes sense, and it's a phrase that Steve Bannon uses a lot. But one thing, and I'm just a layperson, that I find really helps me is I find someone who I love to listen to, who is funny, but who can hit the topics in a way that is either a topic that I'm really interested in, I'm not interested, but I want to learn about, or something. Anyway, my person is Trevor Noah. So I highly recommend his podcast to just zone out and listen to him. Because he's so diplomatic, because he's from South Africa,
well-spoken,
and he just is he sees it from a non US raised person.
Yeah, and just from a very very centered core he seems to have. Yeah. Well, thank you all. Please.
Don't have a question. Just wanted to say thank you to the panelists for being here with us.
Thank you. I say the same to all of you. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you for coming to our temporary location. We're doing a lot of things in this little space. It used to be a chiropractor's office. So yeah.
There's a sink in every room.
Yes. And we'll be opening up in our Grove Avenue building in July. So I hope you all continue to visit us here in our temporary location, as well as our Grove Avenue home when it gets the full renovation in July. So thank you. Great seeing you all. And these books are free.
Yes, take the books. Take them.
So these are all for free. So help yourselves. To books, to munchkins, to coffee. We close at 9:00. So feel free to stick around, linger for a while. Yeah, you don't have to run out the door. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Appreciate it.